So, you want to make drugs? Welcome to the economics of owning a pharmaceutical company. You probably think owning a drug company is about hiring brilliant scientists in laboratory coats to invent life-saving medicines, putting those pills in little orange bottles, and selling them for a tidy profit. It is not. In fact, the thing this business is named after, the pharmaceutical drug, is not how it actually makes its money at all. The pill is just the bait. But before I can show you the secret countdown clock that really controls this multi-trillion-dollar industry, and before we solve the mystery of why that $19.1 billion miracle drug ended up cannibalizing itself, we need to look at what it actually costs to get a seat at this table. You do not just start a drug company the way you open a bakery or a hardware store. The industry comes in 3 distinct sizes, and each one is essentially a completely different business with a hidden trapdoor that nobody ever puts in the budget. Let us start with Tier 1, the small startup biotech. Picture a couple of optimistic researchers who license a promising molecule from a university lab. How much money do they need just to get in the game? You are looking at around $30 million just to push a single experimental compound through phase 1 trials. It is the very first stage of testing, where you give your new chemical to a tiny group of healthy human volunteers just to make sure it does not immediately cause their hair to fall out or their kidneys to melt. What is the hidden cost that nobody budgets for at this stage? It is the brutal biological wall of indifference. 9 out of every 10 experimental drugs fail before they ever reach a pharmacy shelf. You can spend that entire $30 million over 5 long years, only to discover in a routine test that your miracle molecule gives laboratory mice a mild case of spontaneous combustion. When that happens, your company is instantly dead, and all you have left to show for your $30 million is a very expensive glass beaker and a sad update on your professional networking profile. Now let us step up to Tier 2, the mid-sized specialty player. At this level, you are usually not discovering drugs from scratch in a chemistry lab. Instead, you are buying a molecule that already survived early safety testing, and you are betting the entire farm on phase 3 trials. It is the final, massive testing stage where you give the drug to thousands of sick patients across dozens of hospitals to prove to the government that your medicine actually cures the disease better than a simple sugar pill. Getting to this level will cost you anywhere from $100 million to $300 million. It is the ultimate all-in poker chip. But even if your trial succeeds and the government approves your drug, you immediately slam into the hidden Tier 2 cost that nobody warns you about, the Pharmacy Benefit Manager shakedown. Pharmacy Benefit Managers, or PBMs for short, are 3 giant invisible middlemen who control roughly 80% of all prescription drug sales in the United States. Think of them as 3 massive bouncers standing outside the doors of every pharmacy in America. If you want your newly approved drug to actually sit on the shelf where a doctor can prescribe it, you have to pay those bouncers a secret kickback, politely referred to in the industry as a rebate. That rebate can eat up to 50% of your sticker price. You might celebrate setting the price of your new medicine at $1,000 a month. But by the time the invisible bouncers take their cut and the distributors get paid, you're left holding $400 and a massive operational headache. The price tag on the bottle is a complete fiction. Then we reach Tier 3, the mega behemoths. We are talking about the household names, the titans with market valuations well over $100 billion. You do not build a Tier 3 company from scratch. You buy your way in by swallowing smaller companies whole. Just maintaining a drug pipeline at this titan level costs upwards of $10 billion every single year. For example, in 2023, Pfizer spent $23 billion on research and development alone, more than the entire economic output of many small nations. But the hidden cost destroying the sleep of mega company executives is something called corporate bloat gravity. When you employ 50,000 people across sprawling global campuses, your overhead is a hungry monster that must be fed every single morning. Your administrative and operational expenses stay stubbornly high, even if your scientists go 5 years without inventing anything useful. So, if getting into this business requires risking hundreds of millions of dollars on a 9-to-1 failure rate, paying 50% kickbacks to invisible bouncers, and feeding a multi-billion-dollar corporate monster, how does anyone ever make a profit? How do these companies print so much money that they can afford to run 9 drug commercials an hour on evening television? Here is the secret engine of the entire industry. You think you are running a pharmaceutical company, but you are actually running an intellectual property hedge fund with a chemistry lab attached. You are not in the business of selling medicine, you are in the business of renting a temporary, government-enforced monopoly. When you invent a new drug and get it approved, the government grants you a patent and a period of market exclusivity. Translation: for a window of roughly 12 to 14 years after your drug is approved, it is literally illegal for any other human being on Earth to sell your molecule. During that 12 to 14 year window, you are the only person selling water in a sprawling desert. Because you have absolute zero competition, your profit margins are completely divorced from the physical cost of making the pill. A common cholesterol pill might cost 10 cents in raw chemicals to manufacture in a factory. But because you own the legal countdown clock, you can charge $10 or $100, or $1,000 for that exact same 10-cent pill. During your monopoly window, your gross profit margins hover around 80%. That is where the billions live. But that clock is constantly ticking down toward what the industry calls the patent cliff. The patent cliff is the exact terrifying moment your 12 to 14 years of government protection run out. The day that clock hits zero, 10 different generic manufacturing companies flood the market with exact copies of your pill. Because they did not have to spend $300 million on clinical trials, they sell the exact same medicine for a fraction of a penny. Within just a few months of hitting the patent cliff, the price of your once glorious drug drops by 90 to 95%. The blockbuster drug that used to pay for your entire corporate campus suddenly generates chump change. To understand how violent this drop really is, look at what happened to Lipitor, the most profitable cholesterol medication in human history. In 2010, while it still held its legal monopoly, that one single pill brought in $10.7 billion. Just 3 years later, after Lipitor fell off the patent cliff in 2011, its annual revenue cratered down to $2.2 billion. Over $8 billion in yearly value simply vanished into thin air because the timer hit zero. This terror of the timer is why pharmaceutical companies are utterly obsessed with a legal strategy called evergreening. Evergreening is when a company files dozens of tiny secondary patents on minor details of a drug just to hit the snooze button on their monopoly countdown clock. Instead of inventing a new medicine, they patent a new chemical coating on the outside of the pill. Or they patent a slightly different plastic shape for the injector pen. Or they patent a new dosage recommendation. A great example is a drug called Humira, an arthritis injection owned by a company called AbbVie. The primary patent on the actual medicine expired all the way back in 2016. But by building a fortress of 247 overlapping legal patents around the plastic cap, the liquid formulation, and the manufacturing process, AbbVie successfully blocked competitors and extended their monopoly pricing for another 7 years. They were generating over $20 billion a year, not because they were doing breakthrough medical science, but because they were running a brilliant patent law firm that happened to ship syringes. Now, if you can build a legal fortress around your drug and charge 80% profit margins while the timer ticks down, owning one of these companies still sounds like a guaranteed license to print money. So why do so many of them go bankrupt anyway? Why is this industry littered with the carcasses of billion-dollar biotechs? Because owning a legal monopoly means absolutely nothing if the physical cost of delivering your drug destroys your margins before the clock runs out. A monopoly without a sustainable margin is just a very expensive, very depressing hobby. And to prove it, I want to take you back to the spring of 2010 to witness the rapid ticking clock collapse of a company called Dendreon Corporation. In April of 2010, Dendreon accomplished the holy grail of modern medical science. After years of agonizing trials, they won government approval for a drug called Provenge. Provenge was not just any drug. It was the world's very first therapeutic cancer vaccine, specifically designed to treat advanced prostate cancer. It was a legitimate, undisputed medical miracle. The day the government approved Provenge, Dendreon's stock price went into orbit. Wall Street valued the small company at a staggering $6 billion. They set the price of their cancer vaccine at $93,000 per patient. They had a total, legally protected monopoly on an approved cancer vaccine. It looked like the easiest road to riches in corporate history. Then the logistical clock started ticking. You see, Provenge was not a simple chemical pill you could stamp out of a metal machine for 2 cents. It was a living, personalized therapy. To make a single dose of Provenge, a nurse had to extract a patient's own white blood cells at a hospital. Those living cells were then packed into specialized refrigerated boxes and rushed onto airplanes to be flown across the country to a custom-built science fiction manufacturing facility in Georgia. Highly trained scientists spent 3 days processing that specific patient's blood cells with a vaccine protein, repacking them, and racing them back across the country on another airplane to be infused back into the patient before the cells died. It was a logistical nightmare. The physical manufacturing cost, the actual cost of goods sold, was so astronomical that even at $93,000 a patient, the company was barely breaking even on the labor and refrigerated shipping. Then came the fatal blow. In June of 2011, just 14 months after their triumphant launch, the government's healthcare program, Medicare, looked at the price tag and the complexity. They decided they would only reimburse $60,000 to $70,000 for the treatment, and they restricted coverage to a much narrower group of patients than Dendreon had expected. Instantly, the math broke. Dendreon was trapped in a financial death spiral. Their annual sales stalled out around $300 million. That sounds like a massive pile of money until you realize that maintaining their specialized, refrigerated biomanufacturing plants and their army of technicians cost significantly more than that just to keep the lights on. They were burning piles of cash every single day just to ship blood across the country. By October of 2013, the ticking clock was deafening. Dendreon announced a desperate restructuring, slashing 600 jobs to try and stop the bleeding. But you cannot restructure your way out of broken unit economics. In November of 2014, just 4.5 years after being hailed as the $6 billion savior of cancer medicine, Dendreon Corporation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Their market valuation evaporated from $6 billion down to a pitiful $100 million. They were sold off for scrap metal. They held a legally protected monopoly on a cancer cure, and they still went broke because the physical cost of delivering the medicine ate their entire lunch. When you strip away the laboratory coats, the corporate press releases, and the dramatic television advertisements with smiling families running through meadows, the economics of owning a pharmaceutical company boil down to two completely different mathematical realities: the tightrope walker and the casino owner. On one side of the universe, you have the small operator. Let us call him generic Gary. Gary owns a small pharmaceutical manufacturing plant generating $25 million a year in revenue. Gary does not spend a single dollar on discovering new drugs or running clinical trials. He simply waits for a blockbuster drug's timer to hit zero, and then he produces exact chemical copies of expired pills like basic blood pressure medications or antibiotics. What do Gary's books look like? 60% of his revenue, around $15 million, goes straight into buying raw chemical ingredients and running his factory equipment. Another $3 million pays for his administrative staff and sales team. After paying off his factory loans and covering basic overhead, Gary takes home a net profit margin of roughly 16%, around $4 million a year. That sounds like a respectable, honest living. But Gary is walking a razor-thin tightrope over a flaming pit. Why? Because the government's healthcare inspectors are constantly watching. If an inspector finds a single speck of dust in Gary's clean room or spots a paperwork error in his quality logs, they issue a formal warning letter. A single warning letter can freeze Gary's ability to ship pills for 3 months. Because his margins are only 16%, shutting down the factory for 90 days wipes out his entire annual profit instantly, turning a $4 million win into a $10 million loss before he can even call his banker. Gary is one speck of dust away from total ruin. On the far side of the universe, you have the mega operator. Let us call her Blockbuster Brenda. Brenda runs a diversified pharmaceutical titan generating $40 billion a year in revenue. How does Brenda spend her money? Well, making the actual physical pills only costs her about 10% of her revenue, $4 billion. Her factory costs are an afterthought. Instead, Brenda spends 30% of her massive revenue, a whopping $12 billion, on marketing, television advertisements, and sales representatives. Let that sink in. Brenda spends literally 3 times more money convincing you and your doctor to buy her pills than she spends actually manufacturing them. She spends another 15% on research and development, throwing darts at experimental drugs. When the smoke clears, Brenda takes home a net profit margin of 40%, an astonishing $16 billion in pure profit. Why does Brenda sleep peacefully while Gary sweats? Scale and diversification. Because Brenda owns 10 different blockbuster drugs, she can afford to fund 10 brand new experimental clinical trials. If 9 of those experimental trials fail completely, burning $2 billion to ashes, she does not care. The super profits from the one single winner that survives the clinical lottery will pay for all 9 losers, fund her massive marketing machine, and still leave enough profit to buy her shareholders a fleet of luxury yachts. Brenda is not walking a tightrope. She is the house at a casino where the odds are legally rigged in her favor for 12 years at a time. Let me talk about Harvoni. It was a drug released in the mid-2010s by a company called Gilead Sciences to treat hepatitis C. For decades, hepatitis C was a devastating chronic illness. Patients diagnosed with the virus had to take complex regimens of therapeutics for years and years just to manage their symptoms and keep their livers from failing. From an economic standpoint, chronic diseases are the absolute holy grail for a drug company. A chronic disease means a patient must buy your medication every single month for the rest of their life. It is the ultimate subscription business model, a steady, reliable stream of recurring monthly rental checks. From a medical standpoint, Harvoni was one of the greatest scientific triumphs in human history. In 2015, patients and insurance companies flooded Gilead with orders. That year alone, Harvoni raked in $19.1 billion in revenue. To put that number in perspective, $19.1 billion is enough cash to buy every single living person in New York City a reliable used car. Gilead was swimming in ocean-sized oceans of money. Then, almost immediately, the revenue chart fell off a cliff. By 2019, just 4 years after that record-breaking peak, Harvoni's sales cratered down to $3.6 billion. And they kept dropping like a stone every year after. Why did the sales collapse? Did a competitor build a better drug? No. Did the government slash their pricing? No. Did the drug fall off the patent cliff? No. The patents were still completely active. Harvoni destroyed its own revenue because it did not just manage hepatitis C, it actually cured it. If a patient took a pill of Harvoni every day for 12 weeks, The hepatitis C virus was completely, permanently eradicated from their body. They were healed. They never needed to take another hepatitis C pill for the rest of their lives. By creating a true, permanent, 99% effective cure, Gilead Sciences rapidly cured millions of people around the world. And in doing so, they completely eradicated their own paying customers. They systematically destroyed their own subscription base. It is the ultimate breathtaking proof of the secret pharmaceutical engine. If your entire economic model is built on renting out time on a government-enforced monopoly clock, the absolute worst thing you can possibly do for your financial balance sheet is to make the timer stop forever by curing the patient. Owning a drug company was never about the plastic bottles. It was never about the manufacturing plants. And economically speaking, it was certainly never about curing disease. It has always been about controlling the clock. And if you think renting time from a patent office is a wild way to make a fortune, just wait until you hear how those 3 invisible pharmacy benefit managers I mentioned earlier actually pull the strings of the entire healthcare system, dictating which medicines your doctor is even allowed to mention to you. That story is up next. Trust me, it only gets wilder.